Okay, welcome all you wiretappers out there. Another episode of Gangland Wire right here in the Gangland Wire studio. We have a friend of ours from the true crime fiction world, but maybe not particularly the mafia true crime. And it's going to be a little bit different story. All this guy does connect back to the outfit in Chicago for you outfit people in Chicago. And we have Synova I edit this. We have Synova Cantrell on the Skype, which will go up on YouTube and then on the podcast. So welcome, Synova. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Synova, tell the folks a little bit about you, because most of my fans, most of the, we call them wiretappers, most of the wiretappers out there mainly read nonfiction books about the mafia, whether it be the Five Families in New York or the Kansas City Crime Family or the outfit in Chicago. They may not be too familiar with your work. And the reason I got onto you, is because you wrote a nonfiction book about a guy who grew up in and around the Chicago outfit. And I saw that and I thought this would be a good fit for the wiretappers out there. So tell the folks a little bit about your history here.
Well, I've been a writer for decades. I started out as a journalist, as a freelance journalist, and I was published in magazines and newspapers. And then I started writing fiction. And then while I was the president of a local writers guild, I was approached by a guy that wanted someone to write his biography, and he was an ex-gangster from Chicago, and nobody wanted to touch him. So they sent him up to me, and I said, okay, I'll meet with you. And he spent 4 hours at this restaurant telling me these stories. And at the time, I wasn't into true crime at all. I was, a complete newbie and very sheltered preacher's kid. And I was sitting there trying to keep my poker face on, which I've never played poker, so I don't have a good face. But I was trying to act like this wasn't blowing me away. So I just listened to all these stories for 4 hours, and I just kind of leaned back and I said, okay, so what? You got ties to organized crime or what? And trying to sound cool, and not act like this guy was killing me here. And he looks at me, and I'm little, I'm short, um, and this is like a 6'3", big, huge guy, and he has these steel blue eyes that just kind of can give you the creeps. And he looks down at me and stares at me for a second, and my heart is about to explode as I go, crap, I've said something wrong. And he looks down at me and he goes, well, sis, if I had been organized, I wouldn't have been caught. And then he laughed, and so that's why we named the book Unorganized Crime. But but I honestly, his book is what made me rebrand and start with true crime. I've got 6 true crime books now, and his biography was recently endorsed by a retired FBI agent. He says it's one of the few books written that gives the reader an insight to the criminal mind. And he said, I don't know if he followed through, but he actually is retired and works with the new recruits in Quantico. And he said he was going to tell them that it should be required reading. So I hope so. I was like, woohoo, book sales.
Yeah, really. I know that feeling. Well, that's most interesting. I've been following you for a while. You have a regular blog piece and you're on Facebook and have a Facebook page. And so I've been following and reading your blog pieces, and I like your style of writing, and you find some of the stuff you do most interesting. Particularly when I got into it was you were doing pieces on the Dixie Mafia, which I always found kind of fascinating. Now that's kind of in the true La Cosa Nostra mafia world, that's a little bit of a misnomer, but it sounds good. There's a Dixie Mafia out there. And then on Buford Pusser, I always thought that story was interesting, and his connections with Dixie Mafia people. So, we'll have to do a show on the Dixie Mafia one of these days. But a lot of the other crimes you report on and write about are more like your murders and kidnappings and things like that. Is that correct?
Yes, I write this blog. On Mondays is my Mobster Mondays, so I write about Italians and non-Italians. On on Mondays, and then Fridays is where I put out my cold case work, my missing persons cases, unsolved homicides, that sort of thing. Actually started working as a victims advocate for Missouri Missing Organization, so that tends to make it to where I have a lot of missing person cases to write about. But that blog, it goes out to a potential of 500,000 people each week, and I'm blessed to say that we have started generating some leads, and that I can forward to law enforcement. And I don't know that, I hope that they follow up on them, but my job is just to raise publicity about these cases and then let them do their jobs. I know one specific case that I did raise some tips, and the guy was arrested within a week after my blog went out. So that was, I got the call, the emotional call from the family member, full of gratitude, and so that was very fulfilling thing to do with my blog.
That is one interesting thing about this platform that we have, that can reach out to so many people. And there, I get calls and emails from people. Now it's mainly older stuff that's long, nothing current, but I get a lot of tips and put some connections together that, I used to work the mafia 20 years ago, and it's like, oh, so that's how that works. So people are interested in that, and they feel a little safer reaching out to you than maybe to law enforcement, and
Right.
and they actually people feel like they kind of know you because they've read your writing and followed your career a little bit, and I get a little bit of the same thing. That would be really gratifying to be able to help solve one of those crimes.
Right. Well, I told people, and on the other half of my business, I have a Synova Simply Biz, where I give writing tips for the business of writing. And that's one thing that I was talking about recently. If you can find a passion for what you're doing, and align your business, your writing, with that passion, you can really go far with it. And that's where my passion is. I get to talk to these mothers and sisters and brothers that their family is missing for 20 years, and the mainstream media has kind of forgotten about them. So there's this huge gap. Now on the 20th anniversary, they may get a write-up in the newspaper, but from 1 to 20, it's forgotten. And it's like, once that happens, the leads kind of dry up sometimes. And so that's really where my passion is. And then the whole Mobster Monday started out from me trying to help a victim's family member. They needed me to, I got asked to be part of this kind of, not an official, of course, but it was this little task force that was getting together trying to raise awareness about the Dixie Mafia, because a lady has been fighting for justice for 51 years. Now the case has been put together, and it's on the FBI's desk. So we can only hope that they do something now. But the FBI, I don't know if I'm sure they had heard of the case before, but this was actually a formal submission, and they had the interviews with the victim's family, and so hopefully this time it will go over. But that's kind of how the whole Mobster Monday thing started, was for that case.
Oh, interesting, and I've worked with the FBI a lot in my past, and if you can get them to open a case. And what you did, what you're describing to me, is you actually got them to open a case. They may have known about it, but they didn't, what they call, open a case. And so if they interviewed people like that, they opened a case, which is huge. Once they open a case, then their resources start going into it, and something will probably happen. So
I hope so.
Have you ever heard of the baby Lisa case up here in Kansas City? The little baby that disappeared. The parents, the mother woke up at night and said her baby was gone. The husband was off at work. There's a true crime podcast up here called Generation Why, and they've asked me to come on their podcast to kind of give the police view of that missing persons case. This was a strange one. It was a heck of a story. You might want to take a look at that someday.
I'll check it out.
Called it Baby Lisa.
Okay. I've heard of it, but I don't know the details enough to speak about it. But I'll check it out.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's talk about your book.
Okay.
What drew my attention, unorganized crime. That's what these wiretappers want to hear about. They like organized crime, but they don't mind hearing about unorganized crime. I got a feeling you had the man's name is Sidney Hurd, and he's from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yes.
that was who you met with that got you
Right.
started in this business.
Right. Right. Mhm.
Now, it sounds like he's kind of a character.
Oh my gosh, I honestly, I was working on this book. It took me several years because I went all the way to the Supreme Court archives to prove his story because it's so fantastic. And he's of an age I know, or I hope that I outlive him. And I'm like, I need proof because someone's going to say she made this up, and I want to be able to prove, you know. But I was in the middle of this when the movie Catch Me If You Can came out.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
so I went to read Frank Abagnale's biography and I got bored. I literally made myself finish his book because to me, his story is boring compared to what Sydney did. Sydney's got 50 years of chaos, and his one thing was he didn't specialize in one thing. He got his hands in everything. Short of murder, that was the main thing that kept him out of being a made man. That and his father was an Italian. He was related to some made men, but he was not Italian, and so but his story is 50 years worth of a criminal career, and Frank Abagnale's was 10. And Frank Abagnale basically just did the same thing over and over again and just got better and more proficient. Sydney did everything. The con man games, the flatfoot hustling in Chicago, all these things. He did everything. And then he ended up migrating down to Amarillo because his little Glen Ellen and all those areas got a little too hot for him. And so he migrated to Amarillo and he became the Amarillo arsonist. 22 years, fires just popped up and he got paid. And when it came time for it, I mean, because none of these things last forever. You're going to get caught. You're gonna face justice eventually. And when he finally did, they used those 22 fires as a bargaining chip because they couldn't come up with enough evidence to actually to get him on those. They say, we know you did it, but we can't prove it, um, but we will drop it if you will turn state's evidence. And that's what he ended up doing. But that he's just got a little bit of everything in there. Um, but he was raised in Chicago in Glen Ellen, and there was another subdivision. I forgot what it was called, but he was raised around Glen Ellen and North Lake, and he was. I don't know if any of your listeners know the Wheaton County Jail. He was the first one to be enlisted in that building, and he was also the first one to escape from that building um, as a teenager. So the book starts out with in the middle of his escape from county jail. He lives on the run for a while. And he ends up, hitchhiking all over the place. He meets all kinds of crazy characters in the process. But he's actually on the run for over a year before he's caught under an alias. He had kind of aligned himself with this group of just this teenage group, and come to find out they had stolen the car that they were riding around in. Well, he didn't know this. He said if he had known, he wouldn't have stepped foot near the people because he had a rap sheet. These were just petty teenagers doing something stupid. Well, when they got him down into a Florida prison, he was in Rayford. He got down there in a time where the South hated the North, and he was a Yankee, and they hated him. And he was told, they put him in there and they didn't know who he was because it was under an alias. He had stolen some ID. So it took him a few days back before the internet. I think it took him quite a while to figure out who he really was because they had to send out, you know. But when they figured out who he was, they immediately put him on lockdown. I mean, they're like, holy cow, we got to keep this guy. And that's the kind of, he had shoot to kill orders on his head when he was 17. I mean, when he escaped from Wheaton, he was always one of those that was very manipulative, and he necessarily wouldn't shoot you. He would beat you half to death, but he didn't really want to shoot you. Um, there was something in his Catholic upbringing. He said, I know a lot of Italians are Catholic, but there was just something in my Sunday school days that I couldn't kill somebody. He's like, I would never admitted that till I retired. He said, but he would get other people to do things for him. And so he picked a guy that he thought was crazy enough to take out the police if they got into a gun battle. Well, that kid was actually younger than him, but because he chose that guy, he ended up having shoot to kill orders on him at 17, because the guy he was with was terribly dangerous. But anyways, that's just the way the book starts. It goes on for 50 years. He ends up, it culminates in him counterfeiting gold cougar ants from Africa.
Yeah,
This is
tell us. Let's go into that story. I want to hear that.
that story.
That's kind of
Okay.
one thing that really drew my attention. Now, this guy, he grew up around mob guys in Chicago, but he was kind of a traveling criminal too. And he got down to Amarillo, Texas. He's an arsonist, so everybody in the underworld knows
Hmm.
Sidney Hurd. That's how you find those arson jobs, is people
Right.
know you and they ask around, well, who, I'm over my head here. I got an insurance policy. Let's
Right.
do something about this building. And, he gets led to him, and he's part of
Right.
the underworld there in Amarillo.
Well,
But he
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 was the
was
underworld. Yeah,
his
because
underworld. I
see,
believe that.
he told me, he said he couldn't be a made man, but he was protected by made men in Glen Ellen. And one of the really, before we get to the Cougar Ant thing in the 80s, when he was a teenager and he was caught in Rayford prison, he was actually part of a landmark decision that all law enforcement know about. The Supreme Court decision that came down in October, I think it was 1963, was the Gideon versus Wainwright decision, where everyone got the right to an attorney. Well, what people don't realize is Gideon wasn't the only petitioner to do that. He was the first. Well, Sidney Hurd and 5 other men are on that original group. They all sent their petitions in one package from the same prison together. And Gideon was the one that was kind of the flagship case, and so his name got on all of it. But as far as Sidney and I can tell, Sidney is the last surviving petitioner of that landmark
Wow.
decision because he was so young in that prison. But anyways, that story is the first time he went to Supreme Court and changed the laws of our land. Go forward into the 80s when he's doing the Cougar Ant thing, he gets the Supreme Court to change the laws again. And the reason being is he was very brilliant. He was very, even to this day, he amazes me. He can meet someone 20 years ago and he can tell me down to their facial descriptions. I mean, he's got this mind that just amazes me. I have to write everything down, but and he said, well, for so many years my life depended on that. I had to be able to remember things. And if I couldn't, I knew that I could take one wrong step and I'd be dead, you know. But when it came to the Cougar Ant thing, he had studied the laws. He was bored one night in his jewelry shop. He didn't want to go home to his wife, so he was staying over in his jewelry shop. And he's like, he was reading the Wall Street Journal, and they reported that a big batch of cougar ants had been stolen and they hadn't been found. Well, that sparks an idea in his mind. He starts sending out feelers on the street to see if anyone's interested in buying hot cougar ants. Well, there was a lot of interest. And so he's like, well, I don't have the missing cougar ants, so I'm going to manufacture them. And so he actually it took some trial and error, but he found a company out in California that would make them with the word copy on them. Okay. And he would then take them and under a microscope and he would solder or he would rub off the word copy, however he did it. And then he would dip them in gold. And so he said an $85 bottle of liquid gold, and he made, I don't know, I think he said he dipped 100 of them in there. So, I mean, he was really making a profit here. And then he'd sell them for $800 a piece. And so he traded them for drugs, he traded them for all kinds of things. But the ones that really got the FBI's attention and got the feds down on him, he had taken a bank for 270 grand. He used them as collateral for a loan. And when he did that, he crossed over into Fed territory. And so that's where he said he had a rule in his hot Cadillacs and his all of his schemes, that he would always keep the take less than 100 grand. He said because he knew it wouldn't draw as much attention. A lot of times it wouldn't be as investigated. And so he always had that rule. Well, at this point, he had gotten greedy, and his cohort convinced him to hit this bank for 270 grand. And he's like, that was the big mistake. If I had just kept running like I was, it would have lasted a lot longer. But anyways, by the time he got those coins done, he said you can't match the weight exactly to gold. And so he said what he would do is he would dip it until it was as close as possible. Then he'd put it in a plastic sleeve. And behind that plastic sleeve, you'd put a little bitty slice of cardboard. And so that would make it, when you throw it on the scale, it was approximately the right weight. Well, of course, a smart person would want to take it out and weigh it, but he wouldn't let him. He's like, no, these are uncirculated. You can't take them out. And then of course, if anybody started to question him, he would back out of the deal.
Yeah.
But by the time this was all done, he had studied, and the law of the land was you can't counterfeit. I can't remember the exact verbiage, but basically you can't counterfeit uh, any coin of the realm, was the way it used to say in the law.
Mm-hmm.
So that means you can't counterfeit any American currency. Okay. Well, they couldn't get after him until they had that changed. So they were already investigating, they were tailing him. He said he had 3 different types of law enforcement cars following him everywhere. And there is a story about how he dressed up in disguise and got some people drunk to get through the airport. But anyways, there's a lot of sarcasm in this book as well. I put in there, that's the one time a gangster ever willingly got into a trunk. I put a lot of sarcasm.
That's a
in
good
the
one.
book.
That's a good one.
You know,
That's a good line
so,
there. That's gold there, man.
but I've got a better one that I'm designing a T-shirt. I'll tell you about that anyways. But by the end of this, he got the law changed, or the feds got the law changed to where it says any coin of legal tender, meaning anybody's coins you can't counterfeit. And
Okay.
then they took him out. Well, not take him out. They didn't kill him, obviously, but
Right.
they took down his business. But anyways, he by the time they got him, he had so many people turncoat on him that he's like, well, screw it. These were my best friends. They're all turning on me. They're like, we know you did these fires. We will drop this if you will turn state's evidence. And so he ended up doing that. And then he ended up later, through all kinds of chaos, getting his life together. And now he tries to speak to like boys groups and stuff, teach them,
Mm-hmm.
this life isn't what it looks like. But anyways, at one point, and this is one thing that I can't legally say for sure, but I will tell you the conspiracy. Um, when they confiscated his gold coins, they were so good that they used them, the Treasury Department used them as a learning tool for people trying to spot fakes.
Oh
And
yeah.
and we were told that 120 of them were in a plaque, in a shadow box hanging on the U.S. Treasury Building's wall. Well, I went to try to confirm that. And I got a hold of a lot of people that wouldn't talk to me. I got a hold of the actual caretaker, the person that takes care of the stuff in the building. I got a hold of him, and he told me his exact words were, I cannot legally uh, tell you yes or no. I can't tell you for sure yes or no. I'm not allowed to tell you what's in the Treasury building. But the way he worded it made it sound like yes, they are there. So if any
Interesting.
of your listeners want to travel to the U.S. Treasury building, see if there's some Cougar Ants on the wall, snap a screenshot and send it to me.
Really, I will. Yeah, you hear that, wiretappers out there at the U.S. Treasury Building in Washington D.C. and go in and you see some Cougar Ants, 5 Cougar Ants hanging on the wall in the shadow box. Take a picture of it and send it to me, and I'll get it down to Synova. So interesting.
Yes.
Those Cougar Ants are a little bit like like counterfeit pieces of art. There's people out there that can counterfeit, like a Van Gogh painting, and nobody except an expert can tell the difference. Those cougar ants were probably really floating around out there still. Somebody's got them in the safety deposit box saying, this is my retirement. I'm gonna pass this along to my kid, not knowing. Like the ones he traded for some looks like, I think I see in your blog piece that he traded them for a couple of kilos of cocaine down in Mexico. Well, those things are probably still being used as $500 cougar ants, because nobody would know. Many areas you wouldn't know the difference unless you took some kind of an expert who was really had a critical eye. Otherwise, what's it? Just because it's a cougar ant, we assign a value of $500 or $800 or whatever, and that's the value of it. Like a painting, painting for one person might be $10, another person it might be 10 million. So, interesting crime.
Well, he said, and this is, I don't want to spark a gold rush to Texas or anything, but he said that they wanted all of them. Well, they only had record of the 120 that they confiscated. And I said, okay, so did you give them all? And he's like, what do you think? And I was like, okay, that's a stupid question. But him and a buddy supposedly buried them underneath his buddy's garage. Now, if that buddy thought he could get some money out of them, I'm sure he has taken them back up. But there is a potential of another 100 buried under some random garage in Texas. Now, you can buy the book and maybe try to figure out where it is.
Oh, there you go.
I'm not responsible for any vandalism.
All right, Synova, this has been great. The book is Unorganized Crime by Synova Cantrell, and she has a blog site. What's your blog site? What's your URL on your blog site, Synova?
Synova Inc., as in INK, synovainc.com.
All right, great. Well, this has been great, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast and giving our wiretappers something to live for. They can maybe go down and get those cougar ants. Although, wait a minute, aren't these counterfeit cougar ants down there?
Yes. Yes, he said there's enough gold on them, though. You can melt it off and probably get you some money.
Get a little bit of money off of it, or sell them to your buddy and say, hey, man, you want to buy a cougar ant? They're half price.
Yeah, hey.
Another thing is when all these cougar ants were stolen, it was a big headline, I understand, when he first got on this idea. And all these cougar ants are stolen out there, and him being a criminal, he could take those, and then other criminals, he'd have some support from a newspaper headline and say, hey, I'm fencing these cougar ants, and you want to buy some of these, I'll sell them to you a little bit cheaper. Now, it's a dangerous game he's playing there when he's dealing with other criminals or with those drug dealers down in Mexico. It's a very dangerous game he's playing. That can get you killed, man.
Well, see, that's the thing. By the time this all winds up to a close, he has his connections run up to the Italians in Chicago and then all the way down to the Mexican mafia. They called him Big Sid, and he literally, what he had done in Amarillo is he couldn't be a part of the family, so he made his own. I mean, he literally had his Cadillac that showed up to a certain diner on Saturday mornings, and he conducted business in a certain chair. I mean, he was the boss of Amarillo. And that was the way it ran. If anybody wanted to run anything through him, he even had, at one point, he had, it was 2 different points. He actually got a hit contract given to him. And of course, he wouldn't kill nobody, but he wouldn't tell nobody that either, because it was all, with him, it was all maintaining the facade. So he has, one chapter in there called Hitman No Kill. He took their money and he went and tripled it at the casino. And then 2 weeks later, he brought the money back, said the person skipped town.
This guy is a character. That had to be a fascinating series of interviews. Where's he at now? You say he does programs with kids and.
Yes, when he can, he started having a few health problems. So this last year he hasn't been out much, but he's actually in Springfield, Missouri.
Oh, really? Interesting. Well, cool. Maybe I'll have to reach out to him one of these days and do an interview with him.
I'll give you his number.
All right, Synova, I appreciate it. And that would be an interesting podcast. And we're going to have you back talking about the Dixie Mafia here one of these days, later in the spring, more than likely. We're in the middle of winter right now. So folks, be sure and go to, it's Synova, Synova Cantrell, Inc., INK, right?
No, not my last name, just Synova Inc.
Oh, just, I'm sorry. Okay, folks, I'll cut that out. Okay, folks, don't forget, go to Synova, www. Okay, folks, don't forget, go to www.synova, S-Y-N-O-V-A, Inc., I-N-K, all one word, .com. And you can read more of her blog pieces and find out more about some of her cases and these missing persons cases, which everybody's interested in, I've noticed. And I really appreciate you coming on, Synova. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. You have a good one.
Okay, you too. Bye.